out the motherfucking pack. Right out the niggas don't know how to act.
Hello, hello, and welcome back to yet another NFL video. Today, we are going to be regrading the 2019 NFL first round. An objective look, of course, no bias involved here. 2018 draft was star-studded. We're going to do every draft leading up until eventually we get to draft day this year. But for 2019, it's it's interesting. I'll just say that. Let's get right into it. No need to keep y'all waiting. And please ignore all these ads. I am not getting paid by any of these people. But let's get right into it, man. You can see the tiers here. We have future Hall of Famer, great pick, good pick, average, bad pick, and of course, the bust. So I'm just going to go in order of the position. Of course, we got the notepad. We took notes like we do every video. So let's get right into it, man. Starting off with the number one overall pick, Kyler Murray. I'm gonna put this as a good pick for a couple reasons. Namely, because this was not a good draft class for quarterback. As you will see, the only other first round QB was, Daniel Jones, so they didn't really have many options. Did the Cardinals, sorry, did the Cardinals in this situation. And they were just moving off of Josh Rosen, and Kyler Murray looked like a great prospect, but let's get into Kyler's career. So the first 3 years of his career, he started off great, right? One Rookie of the Year, back-to-back Pro Bowl selections, but come to find out, towards the end of the season and in that one playoff game he played against the eventual Super Bowl champion Rams, he collapsed. He fell apart. And in the last two seasons, he's had a bad team around him, and a massive injury at the end of 2022 bled into 2023, kept him out the majority of the season. And you can basically just say the last 2 years of his career have been a complete waste. Nothing to show for it. And I'm trying to look at now, where is he 5 years into his career? He's not a top 10 quarterback. And you know, 2 years removed from his last Pro Bowl, so you could make an argument he's going downhill due to his injury. And he is still young, but I think it's pretty clear to see that he will never be an MVP level player. I just don't think he can overcome his limitations, notably being the height and his play style. He's now outside of his rookie contract. There's no way I think that the Cardinals could put a good enough roster around him for him to take them into, deep into the playoffs. So I think the, you know, the mold for NFL teams nowadays is to build a stacked team around a young quarterback while they're on their rookie contract. And now that Kyler's off his rookie contract, I think they're kind of cooked in that sense. Maybe they could put a playoff team together in a few years, and who knows what could happen then. But I just I don't think Kyler is ever going to get much better than he is right now, and hopefully for his sake, he can bounce back from that severe injury. Next up, the number two overall pick, Nick Bosa. Nicholas John Bosa is the best player in the entire draft, and it's easy. There's no doubt about it. Let's just get into Nick Bosa right here. Pause. He is the only player in this entire list who has made more than two Pro Bowls. He's made four, by the way. He has 53 and a half sacks in just 68 games. He has three straight seasons, okay, with at least 10 sacks, 50 tackles, 15 tackles for a loss, and 30 QB hits. 30 QB hits. He is the best player in the entire draft. He's arguably a top three or four player in the entire league. He is constantly in that cycle of Defensive Player of the Year, along with T.J. Watt, Myles Garrett, Micah Parsons, Max Crosby, guys like that. He is a dominant force on defense, and without a shadow of a doubt in my mind, he will be a Hall of Famer. Moving on, Quinnen Williams, the third overall pick right here, blesses himself after he sneezes. We're going to put him in the great pick category. You know, he has made a clear improvement since the Jets hired Robert Saleh from San Francisco, obviously a defensive guru. and he has made back-to-back Pro Bowls as a result of that acquisition at head coach. He's had 4 straight seasons with at least 5.5 sacks, which is very good for an interior defensive lineman. And he is at the top of that list. Now with Aaron Donald gone, it's kind of an argument, is it Chris Jones, Quentin Williams, Justin Matabuke, for example? There's a tight group of guys, and there's not really a clear number one. I think Quentin Williams, you can make an argument that he is that guy, and he has the potential to get even better. He could easily sneak into that future Hall of Fame category because the improvement has been clear. He's not been injury prone, and it seems like he is in a good system fit with his current head coach. So Quentin Williams certainly has the potential to enter that Hall of Fame tier. And what I'm judging this off of is based on the team that drafted them. So we're going to get to some guys who they didn't really work out with the team that drafted them, but since then they've gotten somewhat better. That's not going to come into play here. This is strictly talking about the team which drafted them. And getting into a clear example of this, we got Clelin Ferrell, who was drafted number 4 overall by the Raiders. He was a bust. He was a bust. It was clear as day during the draft that he was a reach, a massive reach by John Gruden and Mike Mayock. Um, and he actually had his best season as a rookie, which was not saying much because he only had like 3.5 sacks. In 4 years with the Raiders, he had 10 sacks in 4 years. He just could never put it together. He had a very low ceiling, did not develop at all during his time in Oakland. And, he actually had a solid season this previous year with the 49ers. I say solid because he had like 3 sacks, I think, but, you know, that's good for his standards. And, he could still develop into a solid role player. I think he just signed somewhere. Maybe it was the Jets. I'm not sure if it was the Jets, but he just signed somewhere. So there's still hope for Clelin Ferrell, but in terms of what he did for the Raiders, it was awful. It was a massive bust and a just waste of the number 4 overall pick. Man, that was a rough move. John Gruden's drafting was suspect, to say the least. Moving on to the number 5 overall pick. This is kind of crazy in hindsight to think about. A middle linebacker, Devin White. And not only did Devin White get drafted in the top 5 as an inside linebacker, he turned out to be a great pick. Now, he did just leave in free agency to the Eagles. But when we look into his tenure in Tampa Bay, he won a Super Bowl in his second season, in which he was a key contributor to that team. He had back-to-back seasons where he was a Pro Bowler in one year and an All-Pro in the other year. He is extremely well-rounded and talented. He excels in all areas that you ask a middle linebacker to excel at. He's good in coverage. He's great at stuffing the run, and he can also get to the quarterback and gets way more pressure than most. He's in that top tier of middle linebackers who actually can get after the quarterback as well. So he is extremely well-rounded. And, you know, the only thing holding him back was the motivation the last couple years in Tampa. After Tom left, they would not pay him the money I thought he deserved. I think he is one of the best middle linebackers in football, and I think the Eagles got an absolute steal. So while he is capped out at a great pick for this video standards, I think he could still become a future Hall of Famer with the Eagles and take another step in his career. Next up, we got Daniel Jones. And, this is one of the more interesting ones to talk about on the list. Saquon on the last video was also extremely interesting. The Giants with, just some questionable moves. I'm going to put this in the bad pick category, and here's why. Daniel Jones has only ever been as good as the talent around him. And let me explain. He does not elevate the team. His first couple years when they had a very bad roster around him, he was not able to overcome that, and they were just garbage as a result consistently. But last season, not this previous season, but 2 years ago, when Brian Dable came in and the defense was playing well, and he had guys around him, mainly just Saquon being healthy and a better than average offensive line for the Giants standards, he played well enough to get them to the playoffs, and he also helped them win a playoff game. So like I said, he doesn't elevate the talent around him necessarily. He just did what he had to do, and when the time came, he stepped up and helped them win a playoff game. But then you look at last season, where the talent was not as good for whatever reason. Notably, Daniel Jones himself was just not playing well. He didn't get along with Brian Dable. He was awful. The team was awful. And they plummeted as a result. And now, 5 years in, even though they gave him a massive contract, which they were kind of forced to do, they want to move on from him. So if you want to move on from your guy after 5 years, it has to be a bad pick. They don't want him. That says all I need, all that says everything that it needs to say. He has 86 career turnovers and 75 career touchdowns. And as soon as he got that money, he fell off a cliff. So it's just I don't think there's any argument to be made really that Daniel Jones is just not that guy in terms of talent. So that's a bad pick, in my opinion. Next up, we got Josh Allen, the edge rusher. Talked about the quarterback in the last video. Where is Josh Allen, the edge rusher? Here he is. I'm gonna put this. I'm gonna put this in the great pick tier, certainly, and I'm probably gonna put him. I actually might put Devin White at the beginning since his team won a Super Bowl. I might put Josh Allen above Quinnen Williams because Josh Allen gets a little bit slept on. Josh Allen was a Pro Bowler as a rookie. Think about that. As a rookie edge rusher, he was a Pro Bowler. He was also a Pro Bowler this previous season, and he's coming off an all-pro caliber season. It's just that there were so many edge rushers that were just dominant last year. Josh Allen kind of got slept on. Last season, Josh Allen had 17 and a half sacks, 33 QB hits, 17 TFLs, and 66 tackles. That season right there, you could put it side by side with Nick Bosa's career best season, and it looked pretty damn similar. Okay, so keep that in mind. He's had 45 sacks in 74 career games, and I just think Josh Allen, I think has he already re-signed with the Jaguars? I'm not sure. I know he is currently on the team. I think he is going to be there long term, but man, in terms of just raw athletic capability, Josh Allen is at that top of that list. And you look at the Jaguars front seven as it's kind of developing and coming along into its own. You got Travon Walker at the other edge of him. You got Devin Lloyd and Aluakun in the linebacker positions. This front seven in Jacksonville is looking pretty exciting. And Josh Allen is the premier or the face of that front seven. So I think he is a great player. I like the fact that he made a Pro Bowl in year 1 and in year 5. It shows that he hasn't peaked. He's still getting better. So yeah, man, Josh Allen, in terms of just talent, he could easily be all three of these guys, I think, that are in this great pick range, except for Devin White because he has left his original team. Josh Allen and Quinn Williams both could move up into this tier up here. Moving on though. We have TJ Hawkinson. This is a really weird one because I can only talk about his career with the Lions. Because of that, I have to put him in this average category. Because he played 47 games with the Lions, and since they traded him, he made a Pro Bowl. And since he's been with the Vikings, he's looked like just a much better player. He was always good in Detroit, don't get me wrong, but I feel like he has taken that step up in Minnesota, and I feel like he's a top 3 tight end in the league right now. But just talking about his career with Detroit, he didn't do anything. He wasn't there when they made the playoffs or even making that push. He was there during the dark times, during the end of Stafford's years, Goff's horrible first year. It was just he never got to see the fruits of Detroit's labor, which is kind of sad. But you know, if we're just talking about him in Minnesota, he's up in this great category because he's one of the best at his position in the whole league. But just in Detroit, I have to put him in that average category. Ed Oliver, moving on. By the way, TJ Hawkinson getting drafted in the top 10 as a tight end is kind of crazy. But next up, Ed Oliver. I'm going to put Ed Oliver in the good pick category. He's never made a Pro Bowl, but he has gotten better year after year, in my opinion. And he is a guy kind of like Tremaine Edmonds I talked about in the last video for the Bills, where ever since he's been there, there's been like just a clear improvement on that Bills defense overall. He is one of the leaders on that defense, I feel like, and he's coming off a career high year, 9.5 sacks, which is very good for an interior defensive lineman, 14 tackles for a loss. And since he's been there, the Bills have won 5 playoff games. Think about that. That's a playoff game per year. That's a very, very good. Like, if you just look at the past 5 years, I'm sure 5 playoff wins is damn near at the top of that list, besides like the Chiefs and the Niners and stuff like that. So that's very impressive. Uh, and I like I said, I feel like the defense for the Bills has gotten better as a whole because of Ed Oliver's impact. So I have to put him in that good pick range. He's never made a Pro Bowl, but if he stays with the Bills for a long period of time, I could easily see him moving into that great pick range. Next up, we got Devin Bush. This one's tough. This one's very, very tough. I have to put him in the bad pick tier. And it's mainly because of injuries. He almost won Defensive Rookie of the Year because in his first season, he was a monster. He was athletically gifted. He was everywhere on the field, laying big hits, impacting and pass coverage, blowing up the run, getting after the quarterback. He was everything. He was just as good as Devin White, if not better. But unfortunately, injuries claimed Devin Bush. The next 2 years after his rookie season, he missed 14 combined games. That's just too much. And he never bounced back. That form he had as a rookie, that was the best version of Devin Bush we've ever seen. Um, and just talking about his career in Pittsburgh, they never won a playoff game when he was there, so the impact was just not felt. Um, and look, he could still be a good role player in the future. For my Seahawks, he didn't really have a big role. I think he just signed with the Browns, so we'll see how big of a role he has there. But for Pittsburgh, he was a letdown, and it's not his fault necessarily. The injuries just seem to be too much to overcome. Moving on, we got Jonah Williams for Cincinnati. You know, this might be a little controversial. I'm gonna put this in the bad pick category. Now, look, I know that he has been a consistent starter for them. The last 3 years, he's played 3,234 snaps. That's a lot, right? That's well over 1,000 snaps a season. That's being there game in and game out, and I respect that. But in his first 2 seasons, he only played in 10 games. He's never made a Pro Bowl. And for the Bengals, to let him walk in free agency says a lot, in my opinion. If he was really that important, right? You don't let that guy out the door. And they had no problem letting him go to Arizona. They brought in Trent Brown from the Patriots on a 1 year, $4 million deal, and they think he can replace him. That just shows you what they think about Jonah Williams and his production when he was there. Because you could make an argument. I know that since he got there, the Bengals have made that turnaround, but that's because of Joe Burrow. That's not because of Jonah Williams. Let's be honest here. And you could make an argument that because of all the pressure he's allowed and all the sacks he's given up, that it has hurt Joe Burrow's career in the long term. I know Bengals fans have been very critical of Jonah Williams in the past, so I'm not going to pretend like they were crying when he left. I think they wanted him out, similar to a Daniel Jones situation. Just because he's been there and he's been a starter doesn't mean it was a good pick. At this point, you look at 5 years in the future, they let him walk. So essentially, right now, from that first round pick in 2019, they have nothing to show for it because they let him walk in free agency. Moving on, we got Rashawn Gary, Green Bay. I'm gonna put this in the good pick category. Rashawn Gary, he had a slow start his first 2 years. He's moved around a lot in terms of position. He's kind of played in a lot of different places. But in the last 3 years, he has 24 and a half sacks in just 42 games. Think about that. So he's missed several games in the last 3 years, but he still was averaging well over 8 sacks a season. And he's had 2 years with over 20 QB hits. That's good product. That's really good production. And I think he has the potential as long as he can stay healthy, because that's the biggest thing for him. Staying healthy and staying out on the field. He has the potential to be an all-pro edge rusher in Green Bay because they re-signed him. They gave him money. They are happy with him. They want him there. And I think that's the right decision because when he's healthy, he is dangerous for offenses. He blows up plays, eviscerates quarterbacks, gets back there in the run game. I like Rashawn Gary as a player. I think the Packers were good to re-sign him, and he could easily jump up a tier in the future. Next up, we got Christian Wilkins. This probably hurts for Dolphins fans. I have to put him in the good tier, but he might be a great player, man. I'm even going to put him at the top of this whole list right here because Christian Wilkins, he might be just the fourth best player in the entire class that we've talked about so far. Because probably take Nick Bosa and Josh Allen over him. You probably take Quentin Williams over him. If you ask people, Christian Wilkins or Devin White, I'm sure a lot of people are taking Christian Wilkins because he has not missed a game for Miami 3 years in a row. I love that because I know that big guy, his legs have been hurting a lot. So for him to not miss a game, that's incredibly impressive to me. And in these 3 years, let's just break it down. The last 3 seasons where he has not missed a single game, 12 passes defended, 12 passes as an interior defensive lineman. That is incredibly impressive. 252 tackles. 252. That's over 80 a year. Linebackers don't get that many tackles. 17 sacks. Impressive for an interior defensive lineman. 36 tackles for a loss. 43 QB hits in over 2,500 snaps. That's not even that much. That's only about 850 snaps a year. That's not that much. Those stats are incredibly impressive. And the Raiders in free agency just now, they paid him what he's worth. They broke the bank to give Christian Wilkins whatever number he asked for. And the Dolphins arguably lost the best player on their entire defense. Might not even be arguably. Christian Wilkins' impact is massive. He is massive. And it was a great acquisition by the Raiders. I still have to give the Dolphins credit for drafting him, but not re-signing him is a bad decision. In my opinion, you're not going to find many guys that can give you what Christian Wilkins has given you, especially over the last 3 years. He's been a monster for Miami. Moving on. We got Chris Lindstrom for the Falcons. This may shock some people. Let me make sure I got Christian Wilkins or Chris Lindstrom here. There's only 3 white guys left, so it's got to be him right here. Chris Lindstrom, he's going in this future Hall of Fame category. This might shock some people, but do you know that Chris Lindstrom has been a back-to-back All-Pro? Back-to-back All-Pro. He's missed 1 game in the last 4 years. And on top of that, the Falcons gave him a 5-year, $105 million contract. So he's not going anywhere. The guy that's made back-to-back All-Pro teams on a team which has just gotten a lot better offensively, meaning a lot more eyes are going to be on the Falcons, which means more attention for Chris Lindstrom. He's going to be in Atlanta for several more years. It's a no-brainer. He has to be in the Hall of Fame category. He's gotten better year after year. He's consistent. He does not miss time. He's graded incredibly highly by PFF, and the team as a whole is getting better. More attention for him. Chris Lindstrom is in a perfect situation. And by the way, drafted pretty highly for an interior offensive lineman. That's, to get drafted in the top 20, that's a bit of an achievement in and of itself. Guys that get drafted like that, they usually don't miss unless you're fucking Billy Price or something. Next up, this is a bit of a sad one, a very sad one actually. We got Dwayne Haskins. Where is Dwayne Haskins here? Oh, here he is. Yeah, it's unfortunate, but we have to put him in the bust category. He played 16 games for the Commanders. I think at that time they were still called the fucking Washington football team. He may have had some off the field issues. I don't remember exactly what the reason was that led to the Commanders releasing him. But I'm not going to talk ill of the dead. There's no need to bring up the stats. We all know he was not that good. But unfortunately, the real tragedy is he never got the chance to redeem himself. He never got the opportunity to come back. Maybe he wins that job in Pittsburgh. I'm not sure. They were talking pretty highly of him, So maybe the Steelers never even draft Kenny Pickett. Maybe they move on with Dwayne Haskins, but that's sad, man. We never got to find out how good he really was in the NFL. But with the Commanders, pretty easy. It was a bust. No need to harp on that. Moving on, we got Brian Burns. You know, I was gonna put this as a great pick, but now that I'm gonna put it in the good pick now that I really think about it. And look, I'll put it at the top of the good picks, right? Because he's a damn good player. But this is the thing you gotta think about with Brian Burns. This is from the team. It's not about how good the player is. The player himself is probably top 3 or 4 maybe in this entire class, right? But it's not about how good he is. It's about what the Panthers. It's from the Panthers' perspective because 5 years with Brian Burns, he was very consistent. He did not miss much time, right? He never missed more than 1 game per season. I respect that a lot. But they never even made the playoffs, did the Panthers, in his 5 years for the team, right? That says a lot, man. So while he was there and he played all 5 years and he had at least 7.5 sacks every year of his career, he had at least 15 QB hits every year of his career, even though he was a 2-time Pro Bowler, they never even made the playoffs. So they didn't turn that into anything because they had no offense the entire time he's been there. And look, the fact that they've still got a second round pick in return, that helps this ranking here. But I can't put it into the great pick category because they didn't do anything with it. And I know you might be saying, well, the Jets haven't done anything with Quinn Williams. The Jaguars haven't done anything with Josh Allen, but Quinn Williams and Josh Allen have both had all pro caliber seasons. I wouldn't consider Brian Burns to have ever had an all pro caliber season. He's had very good Pro Bowl years. He's been incredibly consistent. I'd love to have him on my team, but I do think he is a little bit below Josh Allen as a player, a little bit below Quinn Williams as a player. So I have to put him at the very top. He's in the very good pick tier, if you want to call it that. But because they were not able to do anything with it, I have to put him a tier below the guys above him. Next up, we got Dexter Lawrence. This has to be a great pick. Yeah, his teammate now, Brian Burns teaming up with this guy. That's scary. Dexter Lawrence is going to the great pick range because he's a back-to-back All-Pro. I can't argue with that. If you're back-to-back All-Pro, you go in this list. And you might be wondering, well, if he's a back-to-back All-Pro, why is he not in the Chris Lindstrom tier? Well, because I do think that Dexter Lawrence is not in as good a situation as Chris Lindstrom is in right now, projecting forward. He has played 16 games every year of his career. Incredibly impressive and kind of weird if you think about it. But the last 2 seasons, he has 49 QB hits as an interior defensive lineman. Wild. A monster for the Giants interior. 50 plus tackles in 4 straight years. He is one of the best interior defensive linemen in the NFL, and the Giants gave him 4 years, $90 million. So they're in love with him, which is understandable. I think his nickname is Sexy Dexy as well. So just because of that, actually, just because his nickname is Sexy Dexy, we're gonna move him a little spot above right there. But yeah, it was a great pick, right? He's developed into what you would think the finished product is, back-to-back All-Pro selections. The only question is how long could he maintain this, right? Because if he makes another 2 or 3, we're talking about the Hall of Fame easily, right? So we'll see. They got Brian Burns to pair along with Kayvon Thibodeaux. That defensive line is looking stout. Okay, so we'll see if he gets better as a result. That's interesting to see because these two guys right here, Dexter Lawrence and Brian Burns, might be linked now moving forward. Next, we got Garrett Bradbury, center for the Vikings. I'm gonna put this in the average pick tier. And this is weird. This is the first guy who's played all 5 years with the team that drafted him that goes in the average tier. And it's because, he's never been a Pro Bowler. He's been injury riddled these last 3 years. These last 3 years, he's missed 12 games. That's not good for an offensive lineman. Like I said, he's been starting all 5 years, even as a rookie. But when it came time to pay him or let him walk, this is the difference I'll guess I'll give him between him and Jonah Williams. The Bengals let Jonah Williams walk. The Vikings decided to give him a 3-year, $15 million extension. Now, you may look at that and you say, oh, well, that means they really like him. Well, $5 million a season for a former first round pick. He might be making less in that contract, that extension right there, than he made as a first round pick. I'm not sure about that, but it's probably pretty similar. So, yeah, I don't think the Vikings are in love with Garrett Bradbury. I'm sure if they had a chance to upgrade that they would, but it is what it is. He's there because they need a center, and I'm sure, if you go to PFF, they don't have him ranked in the top 5 or 6 centers by any measure. So good for him though to get an extension and still be with the Vikings. So, and certainly look, if he plays 8 or 9 years in Minnesota and he's starting the whole time, then certainly I will move that to a good pick in the future when we revisit this list in 5 years, definitely. Next up, we got Jeffrey Simmons for Tennessee. I'm gonna put this in the great pick tier. Jeffrey Simmons is a beast. So many. How many? Look at the interior defensive linemen. I just realized this. Dexter Lawrence, Quinnen Williams, Jeffrey Simmons, Christian Wilkins, and Ed Oliver, all in this draft, and all great just in terms of talent. Like, wow, 5 for 5 on interior defensive linemen, and this top 20 is kind of crazy, by the way. But yeah, we got Jeffrey Simmons for Tennessee. He has also made back-to-back All-Pro teams. This is crazy. Him and Dexter Lawrence. He's missed 15 games in 5 years, which is not good, right? 3 games a season, that's not what you want to see. But in the last 3 years, he's at 21 and a half sacks, which is average of over 7 sacks per season, which is very, very good. And the Titans signed him to a 4-year, $94 million extension. And keep in mind, this Titans defense. Hello, hello, hello. Sorry about that. The mic has to die every video, guaranteed. What was I saying, though? Keep in mind, this Titans defense has not been good. Jeffrey Simmons is one of the only bright spots on the team, and they've even won a playoff game, I believe, since he's been there. So, they've had playoff success even with him as a part of the team. So you got to give him credit for that. Him and Dexter Lawrence, both back-to-back All-Pro selections while having a playoff win on their resume. So because of that, actually, I'm actually going to put them both at the top of the great pick tier. Keep in mind, the only reason I have Devin White at the top of the tier is because his team won a Super Bowl. The only player I think which team can say that. I know Nick Bosa got close several times, but that's interesting to think about. Only pick so far where his team has won a Super Bowl. Okay, moving on. We got Noah Fant. Oh, Noah Fant for Denver. I'm going to put this in the bad pick category because when he was in Denver, he actually did show some signs and some flashes of being worth a first round pick as a tight end. But he only played 3 years in Denver, and he was a part of the Russell Wilson trade. Just because of that, I have to bump him down a tier because while he was in Denver, he probably was an average player, right? But being a part of the trade that brought in Russell Wilson and set the franchise back 5+ years, that's awful. And he never developed because this is not even talking about his days in Denver anymore. Looking into what he's done for my Seahawks the last 2 years, he just hasn't developed. He's been a part of a rotation of tight ends. Um, he's not a bust by any means, but he's not worth a first round pick that you would spend on a tight end. And, he just hasn't developed. I would say this though, he is like the only tight end on the roster right now. So if he does not break through next season and have like 650 plus yards, 5+ touchdowns, that's kind of over for him, I feel like, in terms of people still having hope that he could become one day a Pro Bowl tight end because this is kind of his last chance right now in Seattle. Okay, moving on. Darnell Savage for Green Bay. Uh, you know, I was gonna put this in the good pick category. I'm gonna put this in the average right now. I'm gonna put it right there with Garrett Bradbury. because he did play 5 full years for the Packers. He only missed 11 games. For a DB, DBs get hurt a lot. So for a DB that only missed like 2 games a year, that's not too bad. He was never a Pro Bowler, never an All Pro, but he was a consistent starter. Think Terrell Edmonds in the last video for the Steelers. Statistically, he was average, except he actually got worse over time. If you look at it, especially in coverage, his last 2 years in Green Bay, not been good. Definitely not been good. Uh, and they had no problem letting him walk. The Jaguars paid him a lot of money. I think that was a pretty bad decision. But the Packers, they saw the opportunity to get Xavier McKinney and they said bye bye Darnell Savage. So that does not bode well for. I was going to put him in that good pick category, but only playing 5 years, never making a Pro Bowl. Uh, yeah, yeah. I'm just going to say he was a consistent starter. Good for him. The Jaguars gave him a lot of money, but in Green Bay, I don't think he was that good of a player. Moving on, though, to a guy who was going in the bust category, Andre Dillard, drafted by the Eagles. And you want to know how many snaps or how many? It says he played in 43 games in Philly. Most of that was special teams. The man, as a first round offensive tackle, played 714 snaps in Philly on offense. 700. That's an average. Because he played in what? 43 games. That's an average of what? Not even 20 snaps a game, like 16, 17 snaps per game on offense. In only 43 games, by the way. He was placed on IR 3 times in Philly. So injuries obviously just crippled this guy's career. He never developed at all. Still to this day, I think he recently got a chance to play in Tennessee. He was not good. He was awful. So he never got over his injury problems. This guy's a bust in every definition of the word. And it's kind of weird to be a bust and not be that high of a draft pick. It's like you don't have that high of hopes, but he never even saw the field really in Philly. 714 snaps in 43 total games. That's embarrassing, man. Come on. Next up, we got Titus Howard for Houston. I'm gonna put this as a good pick. I'm gonna put this as a good pick for the Texans because he has been he's kind of like the upgraded, he's like the good version of Jonah Williams because he has missed time. He's missed 22 games in 5 years. That's not good for a tackle. 4 games a year, very suspicious. But the Texans, they seem to have him in their long-term plans because they gave him a 3-year, $56 million. That's a big extension, $56 million. So they seem to like him. They think, at least when he's healthy, he's a good right tackle. And, he got paid accordingly. So I can't argue with the Texans because that's their decision to make. And because of that decision to extend him, I have to consider it a good pick because on paper, we're looking at Titus Howard being a starting tackle for at least, 7 years in Houston. So you can't argue with that. Moving on. We got Josh Jacobs. This one's kind of weird. I'll put in the good pick category because at his best, Josh Jacobs had a season 2 years ago where he was the best running back in football, over 2,000 yards from scrimmage. But the Raiders did not think that he was good enough to pay 13 plus mil a year, even 12 plus mil a year. That's what the Packers did. He made 2 Pro Bowls and had 1 All-Pro selection. He had at least 1,100 total yards each year of his career. That is so difficult to do for a running back because even though he's missed time, he has not been completely healthy. He's missed 10 games in 5 years. Okay. That's pretty healthy for a running back. Okay. And for him to put up a consistent 1,100 yards each season at least, that's impressive to me. That should have been respected by the Raiders and they should have paid him the money he deserved. But he never won a playoff game in Vegas, and the Raiders let him walk in free agency. So it's tough for me to say that it could be any better than a good pick. He was a great player at times, right? Certainly. Worthy of an All-Pro 2 years ago, in my opinion. But the Raiders did not see the value. And if the team that drafts him lets him walk, how can I put it at anything better than a good pick. Same thing with Christian Wilkins. Moving on. Marquise Brown, this is very interesting. He only played 3 seasons in Baltimore. He had his best season statistically there. He helped them win a playoff game. He was a very good playoff. He had 3 playoff games in Baltimore. All of those games, statistically, he performed pretty well. So I'll give him that. He also had a 1,000-yard season, but they traded him away, right? Because he did not want to play with Lamar anymore. But this is the thing. This is the thing that people don't talk about. They got a first-round pick in return. I don't know what that turned into or because apparently it went to the fucking Bills to draft like Kaiir Elam, I think. But they got a first-round pick in return, did the Ravens, which is kind of crazy. So just because of that, just based off what he did, he's probably an average type of pick. But because of the return they got for him, I have to put him in the good pick tier because they spent a pick in the 20s to get him. And then they got a pick in return in the first round. That's kind of crazy to think about. Like the Bills just traded Stephon Diggs for a second round. So to trade Marquise Brown for a first rounder is kind of insane to think about. So good for the Ravens. That was a good trade for them. Next up, we got Montez Sweat. Also a guy who was traded, even though he played a lot. I mean, he played 4.5 seasons in DC. I'll put this in the good pick category. I think Montez Sweat is there were so many. This draft was loaded with defensive linemen and edge rushers. Let's look at the edge rushers. Nick Bosa, Josh Allen, Brian Burns, Rashawn Gary, Montez Sweat. Like, there were a lot of good edge rushers in this class. And also interior defensive line. We got 10 defensive linemen, I think, who have been Pro Bowlers in this draft class alone, which is kind of crazy. Montez Sweat, though, he had 35.5 sacks in DC. He had at least 5 sacks every season, which is very impressive. You usually don't see that consistency, especially from a young guy. And his best season was this previous year, 12.5 sacks. He made a Pro Bowl, even though part of that was in Chicago. The Commanders got a second-round pick in return, so that's good value. To spend a late first on a guy and get a second-round pick in return, that's pretty good. Obviously, they never won anything in DC because they've been awfully managed. And the Bears gave him a massive contract, 4 years, $105 million. So the question is not of how good of a player is he, because I think that's pretty easy to tell. The question is how good of a pick was it for the Commanders? Because Brian Burns' situation, they didn't get anything out of it in terms of success in winning games, but they got a second-round pick in return. It's very similar, actually, to the Brian Burns situation. Played a long time there, played over 4 seasons, and traded for a second-round pick. So they have to be in the same tier, in my opinion. Brian Burns made 2 Pro Bowls. Montez Sweat made 1. So at the edge of the same tier, but in the same tier nonetheless. Next, we got Jonathan Abram by the Raiders. Man, what an awful draft class by the Raiders. We got a guy who was a bust, a guy who was a bad pick, and a guy who they hit on, a great pick, but they let walk in free agency. So the Raiders had 3 first-round picks in 2019, and as of right now, they have nothing to show for it. That's insane, man. 3 first-round picks. Teams would kill for that type of draft capital, and the Raiders did nothing with it. That's insane, man. Jonathan Abram, he only played 1 game his rookie season due to injury, but I thought the 2 years after that, he was actually a pretty solid starter, in my opinion. Maybe I wasn't reading through the lines. I was just looking at the raw counting stats. Maybe the Raiders didn't view him that highly because he only played 36 games for the Raiders in total. Obviously, never made the playoffs, and the Raiders had no problems letting him go prematurely. So clearly, it was not working out. He was not as talented as the stats said. He's still in the league. I think he recently signed with the Saints, so we'll see what he does there. But yeah, he's. I don't know if it's injuries though. I don't know if it's just injuries or if he was just never that good to begin with. But not that good in coverage. He's kind of an in the box type of safety, the Jamal Adams build, but he's obviously not as good as doing that as Jamal Adams is. So yeah, just a rough pick, man. Probably shouldn't have been a first round pick to begin with. Next up, speaking of guys that should not have been first round picks, Jerry Tillery by the Chargers. This has to go in the bust tier, but it's not the typical bust. All of these guys usually are gone within a year or 2 or maybe 3 years. Jerry Tillery played 54 games with the Chargers. That's a long time. He had 10.5 sacks though in 54 games. That's not very good. And, he had 2 seasons where I would say, if you just showed me Jerry Tillery's stats over this 2-year stretch, I'd say, that's a pretty solid role player. There's nothing wrong with those stats, but it's kind of like the Taven Bryan effect from the last video I did, where he's an interior defensive lineman that doesn't really excel at anything, and he never developed into a first-round pick. Jerry Tillery probably should have been a guy who was a late second rounder, early third rounder. Same with Taven Bryan, and the stats and the production just did not live up to what a first-round pick should be. Next up, oh man, we got LJ Collier for my Seahawks. Can I just vent for a second? It feels like all of the Seahawks first round picks for just years on years. We had fucking Jermaine Ifedi, Rashad Penny, LJ Collier. These guys just did nothing for us. Rashad Penny was hurt, I'll give you that. But man, Jermaine Ifedi and LJ Collier, and there's probably other guys, I forget, fucking Malik McDowell in the second round. The Seahawks sucked at drafting for a while, man. And it hurt. LJ Collier, you want to know what he did for my Seahawks? In 4 years, he had 3 sacks as an edge rusher. 3 sacks in 4 years. He missed 21 games. He was always hurt. When he was out there, he was awful. He never developed whatsoever. He robbed my Seahawks for 4 years, making that first round money. And he's rich. He's rich. As a first round pick, you make a good amount of money, man. And he made a good amount of money from my Seahawks, and he took it and fucking ran. I don't even know if he's still in the NFL. He should not be. Honestly, this guy sucks. I'm just being brutally honest here. I hate LJ Collier as a Seahawks fan. Moving on. Man, the end of this class is rough. Moving on, we got DeAndre Baker. I think he got arrested for gun charges. I forgot exactly what it was, but he only played 1 year for the Giants. The Giants spent a first-round pick on him. By the way, the Giants cannot draft DBs in the first round. DeAndre Baker out in a year. Eli Apple, remember how bad that was? And fucking, I'm going to give Deontay Banks some hope. Maybe he turns into something, but man, the Giants had it rough for first-round DBs because DeAndre Baker, he's been out of the league since 2021. I mean, if you only play 1 year with the team that drafts you, you have to go into the fucking bust category. Next up, we got Caleb McGarry. I do think DeAndre Baker is in the XFL, the UFL, though. I think I saw that somewhere. Next, we got Caleb McGarry. I'm going to put this in the good tier. Caleb McGarry, a tackle for the Falcons. He's only missed 6 games in 5 years, so he's been incredibly consistent. And he's been there. They haven't moved him around. They haven't benched him, nothing like that. And they gave him a 3-year, $35 million extension. That's good money. It's not premier money for a tackle, but he's a solid starter. He's an older player. This is probably his only big contract he's going to get, and good for him. Good for him. He's going to be with the Falcons for a while, so I have to give them credit where credit's due. They hit on both of their offensive lineman picks in this class, it seems. To end it off, who else? The perfect guy to end this video off with, N'Keal Harry, the poster child for wide receiver bust, man. This is kind of crazy. N'Keal Harry. Do you want to know the stats? He played 33 games with the Patriots. He had less than 600 receiving yards. As a first round, to get chosen in the first round as a receiver is a lot. There were only two. There were only 2 in this entire class that won this first round. Marquise Brown and N'Keal Harry, right? Marquise Brown barely struggled. In 5 years, he only has 1,000-yard season. N'Keal Harry doesn't have 1,000 yards in his career. It's been 5 years. He is out of the NFL already. He went to the Bears, I think. He had like 100 yards there. He went to the Vikings. He's been a special teamer, I think. I'm just going to consider bro done for. Oh, man, that might be Belichick's worst pick, honestly. N'Keal Harry. And keep in mind, he was a starting receiver in Brady's last year in New England. That's what he had to work with. N'Keal Harry. Oh, man. I'm going to wrap that video up right fucking there. Talking about N'Keal Harry is giving me a goddamn migraine. I hope you enjoyed. Leave a like if you did. Subscribe if you're new, and I will see you on the next one. Peace.
It's out the motherfucking pack. Right out. But niggas don't know how to act.